Welcome to the Andrew Zimmel Podcast. I'm Andrew Zimmel, your host as always. We're not just a sports podcast anymore, baby. We're talking about films on this one. On this episode, we're going to talk about Little Women. I'm going to tell you why it was my favorite film of 2019, what I thought was great about it, what I thought could have used some work. We're going to get into it. So that's what this show is going to be about right now. I've done this little intro, and I like it a lot. And if you guys don't like it, tell me, and we'll change some things up. But what we're rolling with right now is I'm going to continue to give you a little bit of a tease, then we're going to throw it to the music, and then we're going to get into the podcast. So that's what we're doing from now on. I thought I would get this out of the way earlier in these shows so that this doesn't come to a surprise to anyone. So, hit it. Let's go.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Oh, excuse me for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it. You believe in miracles? Yes!
I want to start this podcast first off saying that I write these reviews for a newspaper in San Marcos, Texas, the University Star. So while I have seen all the Oscar movies and I have opinions on all of them, I wrote really, I think, in-depth reviews for all these movies, and they're going to come out on the website. 1917, which is another podcast we're going to do later, and Little Women are the only two that are up right now. So those are the only two movies in this Oscar series that I'm going to break down right now, because I don't want to step on the toes of those guys over there, and I don't want to try to get ahead of myself on the podcast. So for the time being, we're just going to do the movies that are up on the website for everybody to go back and read. So with that said, let's get into this movie. And this is by far my favorite. And the other reason is that I did this is because this is by far my favorite movie of 2019. And this is a movie that isn't like all the superhero movies that you might see. This is a movie that is unlike all the other Oscar movies, in my opinion. When you get a cast that has Saoirse Ronan, Florence, Timothée Chalamet, Emma Watson, and a great director like Greta Gerwig. When you get a group, an ensemble like this, immediately my first thought is Oscar bait. That Greta and Saoirse had done Lady Bird, which was an Oscar-nominated film in 2017. If you haven't seen that, that's one of my favorite movies as well. You can go find that on Amazon Prime. Again, you're doing yourself a disservice if you haven't seen that movie. But when you get a group like this together, immediately I think, okay, this is a movie that they want to win an Oscar. That the production studio and everybody in the cast thinks that this is an Oscar-worthy movie. And it is. Movie got nominated for Best Picture. A lot of the cast got nominated for Oscars. And this is... It's just, it feels like a movie where all the clogs work together. And I make this analogy a lot when we talk about movies, when we talk about television shows, when we talk about sports. You look at almost like an old-time clock, where if one of the gears doesn't match up with all the other gears, either the time is going to be off, the clock's not going to work at all, or something else is going to be wrong with this clock. And in this movie, all the gears, all the turn, everything works together to make a movie that when I left the movie theater, I hands down 100% thought that this was the movie that was going to win Best Picture. Now, since then, I've seen the other Best Picture nominees. I've seen the rest of the cast and the crew and everything else that goes into making some of these other movies, and I still stand by that take, that I think Little Women by far was my favorite movie. I think it's the best put-together movie, and I think that it's a big disservice to Greta for not getting nominated for Best Director, which we're going to get into later in the podcast. But first, if you haven't seen the movie, you're missing out. It came out around Christmas time. I think it came out on Christmas, where it was in all the theaters around the country. I saw it that opening weekend, in a weekend that had Star Wars, a weekend that had Uncut Gems, a weekend that had all these other really big movies. This movie stood out to me for a number of reasons. First, I came in reading 0 reviews. I had not read Little Women, the source material for the movie, did not read the book, did not go and watch any of the other movies before I saw this one. So I came in with a completely blank slate. And when I say that I think Saoirse Ronan did the best job out of any actress portraying a legendary character from a book, I mean that. So the movie is set in a relatively poor area of Connecticut, I want to say, during the Civil War era America. So the father of these women is not there. Movie centers around Jo March, her sister Meg, Amy, and Beth March. Marmee is played by the incredible actress Laura Dern. They have Aunt March, played by a legend, Hollywood legend, Meryl Streep. So this movie is jam-packed with actresses who, on their own, can carry movies. And that is part of that. I think that's where I want to start with this. Is Laura Dern and Meryl Streep do such an excellent job of playing supporting characters. They come off of the HBO show Big Little Lies, which, again, another show that I thought the entire cast worked really well together. They come off that project to work on this movie, and they fall right into place. I cannot see another actress working as well in this movie as Meryl Streep. And I think that goes without saying how talented she is. But her role of Aunt March, essentially, there's no real villains in this movie. If there's going to be a villain, it's probably going to be Aunt March, who is, if you haven't read the book, if you haven't seen the movie, is a very wealthy woman, unmarried, no children. She kind of tells the girls, Jo, Amy, Beth, that if they're going to make anything of themselves as women in the world, they need to get married. So the entire movie kind of comes from that aspect of marriage is an economic proposition. You get this great character in great actor in Timothy Chalamet, who plays Laramie, who is the rich kid across the block, and he is kind of accepted into these girls' world as they make their way in the world without their fathers at war. They have to kind of entertain themselves. Jo is clearly the best writer of the family. Amy, the best painter. Meg, the best actress. And then Beth is, of course, the musician. And you see this movie from an audience perspective, and you can identify, at least I could, with one of these characters in every single way. That I could see myself in the types of situations, or see myself in a situation type. And again, I don't want to give too much of it away, but this movie, from an actor's perspective, everything clicked for me. The reason I think this is going to win Best Picture is because we've seen other movies like this come just short. And I think what this movie has, what those others didn't, is heart. Now, I want to bring up a movie that got nominated but kind of sputtered out before the Oscars really even got started, and that was The Post. Had Meryl Streep, it had Tom Hanks. It felt like the movie that was really gunning for the Oscars. Whereas this movie, I feel, has heart. I feel like every actor and actress in this movie, especially director Greta Gerwig, their heart is in this movie in a way that it's hard for me, when you look at the other movies, for those to say that those directors might not care as much about their movies as Greta did with this one. But if you go back and you listen to the interviews on their press tour, if you go back and read some of the excerpts from her interviews, you can kind of see that this is a movie that she knew she wanted to make from a very early age. And as she has grown as a director, and if anybody has seen any of her movies, I went back and I rewatched all of this filmography for Saoirse, Greta, and Timothy Chalamet. Or Charlemagne. I'm sorry, I keep messing up his name. Charlemagne. You go back and I went back and I watched their filmography, and you can see that this is kind of a crescendoing point in all of their careers. All three of them worked on Lady Bird with Greta directing, and it feels like this is the logical next step for that group going forward. And they made jokes on the press tour like, oh, are we going to work together? Are we going to make more movies together? And I really hope that they do, because this movie, far and away, I think it just worked. It made over $16 million in the box office early in their run. I think it was like the first weekend they made $16 million. And this is the other part of it that I really liked, is that you're going to hate me for this, or you might hate me for this, and you might applaud me for this. I really don't care. I am very big in the diversity of cast and the, like, okay, what stories can we tell with what type of actors and actresses, and I really like to see stories that I might not have seen before or might not have heard before, or different takes on this new, not a new generation, but a new perspective of a story. That's why, for all the faults of The Lion King and the remakes of Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, I will give Disney this as they remake all of these cartoons into live action. I think that all of them sprinkle something new, whereas as if it's Will Smith playing the genie and his kind of take on that character, I think that it adds something to the lore. I think it adds something for that new generation who are watching the movie. And while it might not be my favorite movie, or might not be my favorite remake of a movie, might not be my favorite take on a movie, I do applaud them for doing something different. I do applaud them for taking the risk and just changing something. And that's what I think Greta did with this movie, is that she added her own twist to it. And love it or hate it, personally, I loved it. I think that that's important to look at with this movie. And when it goes up for Best Picture nomination, that this isn't just okay, here's the source material, we're going to go scene by scene, line by line, cut by cut, and we're just going to make the book into the movie. You get movies like Harry Potter, you get movies like Lord of the Rings, which do a pretty good job of sticking straight to the source material. That they have the source material, people really love this book, they love this series of books. Okay, well, we're going to take that, we're going to make something new. Whereas this movie, they have a very unique twist on it. And again, I don't want to give away too much for those of you that have not seen it yet, and that's kind of what I'm trying not to do. It's hard to do a review without giving away too much. Hard to do a podcast to talk about the scenes that I really liked without giving away too much. So I'm gonna tiptoe around some stuff. This is the other thing that I really liked, was that the first time I saw this movie, I saw this movie twice in theaters. Once by myself, and once I took my mom to see it because she really liked Little Women. She liked the book. She read it to her mom. When her mother was working in the kitchen, like making dinner, my mom as a little girl would read the book to my grandmother, right? So I knew that she had a connection to the book. I knew that she had a personal connection to the story. So I took her to see it too. And in both times that I saw this movie, for the most part, it was primarily women who were there. Whether it, again, the first time I saw this opening weekend, I was one of two single men that was in the movie theater. It was me and about a guy that I'm going to say is in the late 30s, early 40s. He was sitting about a couple rows away from me. But for the most part, it was moms with either 6 kids that clearly probably weren't her own, that she brought her daughter and a bunch of their friends to go see this movie. Teenage girls went to see this movie. Older women with their husbands saw this movie. But it was really refreshing to see young faces and different faces that I usually don't see. Because when I go see a lot of these other movies, when I go see the superhero movies, it's a very mixed crowd. When I go see some of these action movies, Fast and Furious movies, it's mostly guys. So to sit in a movie theater and be the minority of the minority, a straight white guy in a movie theater full of diverse women, it really refreshed me. It really made me take account into what this movie was for. So, of course, the think pieces come out, and everybody says, is this movie a movie for everybody? Is this a movie just for women? Who is this movie for? And unlike other movies, which I'm going to throw one under the bus right here, Bombshell, the movie that was about the sexual deviancy of Fox News and Roger Ailes and what was going on behind the scenes there, I saw that movie, and I didn't know who it was for. Right? Like, when I saw the movie, I said, oh, this clearly isn't for me. Okay, this feels like a woman's empowerment movie, which is, again, fine. I'm 100% okay with that, but I knew it wasn't for me. But when I talked to my female friends, oh, did you see this movie? No. Okay, why not? It just wasn't for me. So I don't know who that movie was for. Little Women, on the other hand, it feels like a movie for everybody. Because as I sit and I watched it in theaters twice, both times I felt like I was included in the story, in the message of this movie. And to be real, this message could go a bunch of different ways. Here's what I got from it. And the scenes, because every scene I think is great. So when I rated the scenes, and this is kind of getting into spoiler territory, when I rated the scenes for this movie, the number one scene that stuck out to me was when Laurie and Joe are arguing on the hill. So if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, close your eyes and picture it, unless you're driving. Don't close your eyes if you're driving, but if you have a chance, close your eyes and imagine this, right? And this scene is them going back and forth. And one of them is saying to the other one, look, I love you. Okay, there's nothing can change that. There's not going to be any change in the way that I feel about you. I know how I feel, and I think that anybody who's ever loved anyone has felt that before, has known and has had that feeling before. That okay, this is a passion that I love this person, and I'm a firm believer in that once you love something, no matter if it's another person, a pet or something like that, love doesn't go away. It just changes. Okay, and we're going to get into that in another podcast episode later down the road. Love doesn't go away. It just changes. And I think that as the movie continues and you see Laurie and Amy get married and Joe end up getting married as well, you can see the love is there between all those characters, whether it be best friend type of love, whether it be sisterhood type of love, whether it be romantic type of love. As an audience member and as somebody that has had that romantic type of love and had that almost sister-sibling type of love and have that brother type of love and have that love for your parents and your love for just other people, you can see on camera, you can see on the film, you can see in the movie that it's there. Not only between the characters on screen, but between the actors on screen. And that, to me, is what distinguishes this movie from all the other ones. For me, when you look at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and the characters that Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, you can see a mutual respect there. And I think that the characters on screen, I think the actors who play those characters have that mutual respect for each other. And that's nice to see. And when you look at Jojo Rabbit, another movie that got nominated for Best Picture, and you can see the admiration, or the love, the safety between the characters on screen and the actors that portray them. That's refreshing. But the love between the characters in Little Women, to me, watching it felt very genuine. And that is why I think that this is the best picture. I think that is why when I left the movie theater, I felt a sense of love for those characters on the screen. Another thing about this movie is the way that the costumes are made. The period pieces, like I said, Civil War era, just stand out to me so much that it feels like when you watch, it's escapism at its best. And I think that at the end of the day, when you go see movies, that is what you really are looking for. When you see entertainment, when you watch sports, when you read a book, when you see YouTube clips, what you're not doing is you're not trying to watch it. Well, maybe you are, but for me, I'm trying to escape the reality I live in. So a movie like Little Women, where I go see it and I can leave the reality that I'm presently in and go to the world that Greta Gerwig creates, that's special to me. And that's what stood out the most. This movie isn't for women. This movie isn't for men. This movie isn't for single people. It's not for people in a relationship. I think that this movie is for everyone. And if you get a chance to see it, if it's on Redbox, it's on Netflix, HBO, if you can go see it in theaters, I strongly, strongly, strongly suggest that you do. That's going to do it for this episode of the Andrew Zimmel Podcast. We're putting it on more and more streaming sites as we can. Right now it's on a handful. Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify are still kind of, we're waiting for those. Once those get up, you're going to see the podcast links as I blow them up. But remember that this is a daily podcast. We're going to be putting one of these out hopefully every day. I tried to put a bunch of them out same day so that you had a chance to kind of digest and you got a little bit more content. I have been sitting on a ton of content, so I'm trying to get it out as much as possible. But I will say that once we put the daily podcast out, it's going to be great. You're going to really like it. I promise you, you will. And please continue to support the podcast. You guys that have supported me from the old show to this one have been so great. I wouldn't be able to do it without you. And I'm trying to get to that next level. So if you like this podcast, if you liked Little Women, if you saw the movie, if you haven't seen the movie, if this convinced you to go see the movie, go and send this to somebody else that may have seen it, may have not, and then they can listen to it and they can enjoy it too, hopefully. So thank you for listening. Please continue to send us everywhere you can. Love you guys. Bye.